It's new, but it's also like not new. Welcome back to the Scale Builders Guild. Thanks again for watching. Today we're taking a first look, run, and review of the new RC4WD Drive Trailfinder 3, or TF3, as I will probably end up calling it for the rest of this video. And here it is. It's a scaled truck. It's a scaled trail truck. And it has my favorite thing on it in the whole world, leaf springs. I know that probably annoys some of you out there, but I like leaf springs. I like how limited in performance they are. And I like extracting as much performance out of them as I can. And this truck is no different in that right. It is certainly a leaf sprung truck, and capability is probably not its first priority. There are some new features here that we will go over in extreme detail, because that's how this show operates. Let's get started. As you can see, it is a Mojave body. RC4WD Drive has been using the Mojave body on the TF2, now on the TF3. There are a few very subtle differences. First of all, this one's painted. It comes painted, just like you see it here from the factory. This is a nice high gloss white paint. It looks very good. I've already added some decals to it. These decals are included. There are other ones. I will show those off later. But the majority of the features that you would have expected from the Mojave body, they're all here. Square headlights, light buckets, chrome bumper, wipers, side mirrors, door handles, bed clips for tying down things if that's what you were gonna do with this truck. Tail lights, also with nice painted lenses. It is an RTR, so you're getting sort of the ready-to-run package here. This is how the truck looks out of the box. Nothing has been changed. Nothing is different. Everything you get, you see right here, including a few extras, which I will show off here in a moment. I have to get the charger out of the garbage. As it is an RTR, you get an RTR quality radio, nickel metal hydride battery pack, and a wall charger. Batteries are also included for the transmitter, and that's basically what you get. There's also, where did I put that? There's also a manual, a very nicely detailed sticker sheet with some different stripe options, which is nice to see, and two plastic bumpers, front and rear. But if you've already got a bumper on the front, why do you need another bumper on the front? It's just me being nitpicky. And of course, with all those things, you also get the truck, which is a very nice looking truck. I do like that it's painted. There are some strange inconsistencies though. It's almost like they didn't do any pre-finishing before they actually painted it. They just painted it. So there are some mold lines in here that should have been sanded out prior to painting. But that's something I'm willing to overlook. So far, not a lot new from RC4WD Drive, but let's take the body off because the chassis is where all the new stuff really is. So let's do that now. So there you go, that's the body off. And now you can see this is a substantially different truck from the previous TF2. Hard not to notice this gigantic 22R. It is, for all intents and purposes, way bigger than it should be in this truck. It's almost like they said, keep making it bigger. And they didn't know when to stop, because this is pretty huge compared to how big it should be. Actually, I'll give you a good demonstration of how big this should be. Here's another TF2 that I have in the collection. So that's what the TF2 looks like in this truck. And this is RC4WD Drive's engine cover here that they've done for the TF2. And you can see that the valve covers are there. So, okay, I think this is a little bit too big, if I'm honest. Look at the size of that thing. It's hilarious. Obviously, this engine cover, it's also missing some stuff on the sides, but I'm gonna bet RC4WD Drive is gonna offer all of these things as add-ons or upgrades later on. But one thing, I mean, essentially it's probably so big because there is an electric motor in there, but still, it just seems really big. I'm I'm not entirely sure why they decided to make it so large, because that is comical compared to what they were doing on the TF2. Anyways, I digest. All right, so that engine cover, or this faux engine, that's obviously where your 45-turn brush motor is going to go. Mating up to that is a transmission, which offers 2 speeds, so there's a high and a low, operated from this twister servo here, metal servo horn, good to see that. So 2-speed transmission, transfer case, which is all connected. It's all one solid piece now. Of course, you can take it apart to maintain and work on that whole thing, but it is less of a divorced transfer case than it used to have, so it is all sort of in there together. One other thing that you will notice straight away, or hopefully you notice straight away, is that this is a tapered or a widened out chassis in the rear, very reminiscent of the original Tamiya Bruiser, which had this style of chassis, which is a lot more realistic to the actual Toyota Hilux that this truck is based off of. Very nice to see that. I'm going to come back to that though, because there are a few things that I am not keen about in regards to that chassis decision. Okay. With that transfer case, we've got a much smoother skid on the bottom, so that is certainly a benefit to this whole new layout. There is a lot less room for things to get hung up. That was always a problem with the original TF2. It had that giant boat anchor of a skid. So seeing something smoother and tighter to the actual chassis, happy to see that. Good work on that part. To compensate for this gigantic motor and transmission, I don't know what's in. It's got to be loaded with gears. I am going to have to crack that open and get a good look at it. And we're going to have to do that in this video because I want to know where all this space went. What are they doing in there? Anyway, to compensate for that giant motor, they had to move the steering servo off of the front of the chassis. And this is another like head-scratching moment for me because I don't understand why they would have done that. Because now we've got this bell crank setup, which is essentially the worst thing they could have done. Maybe not the worst. I'm sure there are other things they could have done that would have been worse than this. But putting a servo this way and then having this crazy long servo steering arm that goes in a bunch of different directions in order to move the tires just seems like way too complicated and not going to be very strong. In fact, just on the bench, after readjusting the endpoints on the radio, I just didn't feel very confident in the amount of steering travel that this has. And yes, it is a leaf-sprung truck. I am not denying that these don't ever steer very well, but it's certainly not as strong a steering setup as what they were doing before. And I guess it was to compromise for this thing, for all of this, to make it more realistic, which I can appreciate. I like scale and I like scale accuracy, but they missed the mark in terms of the sizing of this thing. So I feel like they could have shrunk this down, still hidden the motor, and gotten that servo up front to avoid this bell crank setup, which it's destined to fail. And I don't mean to be negative about it, but that's not a good decision. That was not good. Okay, moving on. RC4WD Drive's gone to a plastic battery tray. You get Velcro straps included, so you'll quite easily be able to mount any size pack in there. And since there's no full interior on the body, you should be able to put a nice, thick 5,000 milliamp pack on there. So that's good. Okay, moving back a little bit further. You'll notice that, and maybe you didn't notice this, but let me turn the truck around. The leafs on the rear of the chassis are inboard of the chassis, which to me was a strange decision. And I know why they did it. In order to keep using the Yoda 2 axles, which have been in use for a very long time, they had to do this. Otherwise, they would have had to have created a whole new rear axle to compensate for the wider chassis at the rear. They used to make one. It was the Bruiseruptor. Clever name. Bruiseruptor axle had a wider spacing, so the leafs were actually outboard of the chassis, or at least in line with the chassis like they should be here. So scale accuracy takes a bit of a hit there. Performance, I think, is actually going to take a bit of a hit there as well. So there's that. Spring over, just like every previous TF2, with some pretty nice looking U-bolts to have everything mount in there. Nice and strong way to do that. Should hold up to a fair bit of abuse. And plenty of leaf packs. There's only 3, but my gosh, are they strong. There is not a lot of flex built into this truck. Get a 1, 2, 3 block here. Not a lot of flex built into this truck as it sits right now. Obviously, I have done videos in the past on the TF2 and modifying it to make it flex more and to give it more performance. We will definitely be doing that with the TF3. Right off the bat, I mean, I am going to run it as stock. I think that's the fairest way to run it. But once we get that first run out of the way, we are going to modify the leaf packs, reduce that number of leafs in each pack, and hopefully gain a bit of performance, because this isn't gonna cut it. I mean, for a leaf spring truck, it's probably pretty good. You get the Outcry 3 waterproof ESC included, nickel metal hydride or LiPo compatible. It's set up for nickel metal hydride because that's the battery RC4WD drive includes, but it can be switched over to LiPo. They do not list the servo specs on the box. It is a 7.4 volt capable waterproof servo for steering duty, but they don't list any specs even on the servo itself. So I'm going to guess it's not going to be super strong. It's just my guess. Also, one of the other problems, and it's just a scale, stupid, nitpicky thing, but on Toyotas, the leaf perches aren't this direction. It's actually reversed. So the perch that's solid in the back should be in the front. And again, it's a nitpicky thing, but it's how Toyotas work. And it's how A&M Garage fixed it on their new bumper and leaf spring perch mount all in one unit. I don't think this is going to fit on the TF3, so hopefully they're paying attention, because it would be great to flip that around ASAP. All right, so there you go. It's a nicely detailed engine. I can't deny that it certainly looks better than what they had included before, which was nothing. But by not making the hood opening on the RTR or the deluxe edition that came out first, you can't see it. You're gonna have to cut your own hood off, which is fine. Most modelers have the capability of doing that. I would have liked to have seen that happen, though. This is a new truck. Let's do something new beyond whatever this giant thing is. It's bigger than my hand. Okay. What else can we say? The axles, questionable quality axles. I think that's fair to say of all of the Yoda 2s or Yoda 1s. They don't hold up to a ton of abuse. Hope they can prove me wrong. Maybe something new has changed in those two. RC4WD drive does include springs for these shocks, and these are just friction shocks. You do not need to fill these with oil. And in fact, they don't have the springs inside them, which is great because you don't need them. With a leaf sprung truck, just having the shock on there is good enough. That's all you need. Ultimately, I mean, it's a pretty robust truck. There is a tiny bit of flex built into that chassis because it is now stamped C rails. It's not milled aluminum like it was on previous generations. So it's probably overall a lighter truck, which is going to be good for performance, certainly. But because it's leaf sprung, you're going to lose a little bit of that performance because it is so light. So we're really going to have to make some modifications in the future in order to make this a better performing truck. Drive shafts. These are these questionable nylon plastic drive shafts. I am not confident these are going to hold up for very long. But we'll see. We'll see. It's not as cold as it was, so RC4WD drive has that going for them. Plastic sliders on there to complement the plastic bumpers that are included. which you can put on or take off at your leisure. They have included mount points already on the truck. I opted to leave them off because I liked it cleaner without them. I don't think you really need them on this one. It's a nice looking body. Why detract from all of that by putting 2 front bumpers on? You do get beadlock wheels. These are stamped steel wheels that are 6 lugs, so that's a Toyota thing. You also get these RC4-wheel drive MT Compass tires. Better than the whatever the other tire was that they included. Those were not good. This is a marked improvement in the tire department for their RTRs, so that's nice to see as well. All right, let's crack open this motor transmission transfer case thing and see what's going on in there. Okay, I've mostly got it apart, and as you can see, there is a lot of unused space in that motor cover. Presumably because they wanted to put a 550 can in there, or if you wanted to upgrade it to, you could put a 550 can in there. I just don't know that it's totally necessary. I think they could have probably scaled this all down. It looks like a giant diesel engine. I think they could have probably scaled this down a little bit and still made this work somehow. Additionally, I also started to take the transmission and transfer case apart, but it's kind of fiddly, to say the very least. And there's no instructions provided. So don't do what I did, because you'll have a hard time getting it back together again. But let me see if I can get this out real quick. There we go. So inside, you can see that's where the 2-speed lives. And then there's a lot of gears and stuff inside there. But my main kind of concern is the amount of space and the lack of actual volume of plastic in here. It does look pretty weak. So I'm a little concerned about how that's going to hold up. Hopefully it holds up just fine. Yeah, that's what's in there. At least it's nicely greased. That little tiny bearing there is what holds your spur and pinion setup together. There is no real traditional spur. This is it for the gearing off the motor, which is that. So there's that pinion. So you have that pinion there, and then this spur combo here. So it doesn't look like you're going to be able to change the gearing all that effectively, because there is no traditional spur. That's what you get. And that, although there is a set, no, that's as big as it's going to be able to get. And that's the bearing that supports that. So that looks to be a bit on the weak side, if I'm honest. Okay, back together on the bench again. And this is probably the last time you're going to see it as clean as it is. As you can see, stock steering is a bit weird. I don't like the bell crank setup. I just don't. Lots of good low end. Not the best ESC in the whole world, but it'll get the job done. That is a loud transmission. That steering is just, I think that's where we're going to see some failures. And in fact, I do know that there have been a few people who've broken that bell crank already. So I'm just going to have to see if we can increase the performance with a stronger servo, maybe a machined aluminum bell crank. I'm not sure. Like I said, 2-speed, so there is a much higher gear there. Not a lot of great travel on this radio. You know, it's an RTR radio, and it's certainly not one of my more favorite ones. And impossible to drive one-handed, I might add. So we'll be swapping that out before we do the run video, which we should probably cut to now. I almost forgot. One thing that really should be included with this body are inner fenders. Why does it not have inner fenders in this day and age, at this price point? How was it that they couldn't figure that part out? You shouldn't be able to see through. You honestly shouldn't. There should be inner fenders on this truck by now. Okay, that's it for the griping. Let's get it outside, drive it, have some fun.
Now, admittedly, some of that terrain is too much for a trail truck, a leaf-sprung truck of any description, really. But I wanted to see how well it could do, maybe going a little bit beyond its intended purpose. Ultimately, I found a lot of things about this truck that just didn't work as well as they probably should have. The bell crank steering is a really bad piece of design. It doesn't work very well. Steering is really kind of all over the place. It's very loose. I found it just kind of deciding it was going to start turning in a different direction if it hit a bump. And that was pretty pronounced throughout all of the driving. The weight of the vehicle is pretty good. The leaf springs did actually work better than I was anticipating, but they are still very stiff. They're definitely going to need to be at least one, maybe two leaves removed. We're going to play with the kind of the structure of how they're put together and try to squeeze a little bit more performance out of it. The transmission is very loud and takes up a lot of space. I really would have liked to have seen them do something with a scale motor and transmission kind of a case like they've done, just scaled back. Just not as big as it was. I think that could have made this truck a lot better and allowed for a proper servo mounted on the chassis where it should be, right up front. Overall, there are a few nice things about this truck, but I just feel like RC 4-wheel drive didn't put as much innovation into it as perhaps they should have. It seems like some things were over-engineered and underthought about. That's just my bottom line. If you're interested in picking one up, I'll put a link down below. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.